Can you read that out anyway? I'm lazy.
Yeah.
Ruffle.
So in Terran vs X, I feel like I'm playing really slow for Diamond. I keep letting my opponent do what they want while I macro and feel behind. He wants to know how he macros while getting pressured, like defending early pressure as Terran, and close out games when he's ahead. So like kind of controlling the tempo type question.
So how to macro while being pressured, and macro when coming back from a deficit, and how do I close out games when I'm already ahead but can't finish the game? Okay.
It seems like he's trying to sit back and macro a lot as Terran and like play a more defensive style and
Yeah.
getting heavily pressured.
Oh no! We just caught a Zerg player doing the greediest, shittiest build of all time. We could have killed like 3 or 4 drones here. So this is something we'll often see when people come with a question, and I'm not going to harp on about it too much today, and we are going to try to be very focused on the questions. But this already is something which we very often see is if a player's lost confidence in certain aspects of their play, their details early on get sloppier and sloppier. So here we see a Reaper come in, and the Reaper seems very keen to scout, but we've seen a hatch first. That's a very early hatch. So there's no real reason that we like absolutely have to scout. And if we are going to scout, there's definitely no reason to go through the mineral line. But really, I mean, we just don't need to scout anything right now. There's nothing to look for, right? Technically, there's like some roach attacks, but like, yeah, you really, I mean, they're not really going to even have the roach warren starting just yet. So I don't know. It just seems a bit weird that the Reaper is like panicked about scouting at this point. Obviously, you see no defenses, 2 or 3 drone kills, big chunk of the Zerg's econ, and just losing it like that is a massive pain. So that kind of sucks. But yeah, it definitely seems like one of these interesting questions where... So it's like, how to macro while getting pressured is the one which is really hanging me up. Because I'm listening to it and I'm like, what does that even mean? Because I kind of get what it means and I kind of don't at the same time. So how do you macro while being pressured is such a loaded, complex question. Yeah. It could mean anything, you know? And it's like, well, you kind of need to, like, you know those games where you've got, like, lings running in your base? Warriors, do you play again, Demand, as your main?
I play all of them.
You play a bit of all? Yeah.
Yeah.
You ever play Hellion openings?
I love Hellion openings.
I mean, I think we've all played these Hellion openings, but you like kind of like lose your first few Hellions, and there's like lings running in, there's lings keep surrounding you, and like you're constantly like just in this position where they have too much stuff, and you know they're building drones at the same time as building Zerglings, and you're so infinitely behind, and you're drowning, right? You're drowning in a situation because every Hellion needs to be microed perfectly to try and get back alive, but they're like being kind of wily and coming in and hitting your mineral line while chasing the Hellions, and they've probably got a third fully drone behind it. And you know you're dead, but you forget you're dead, and you kind of end up going, how am I meant to micro this? Terran's so hard. And then you look at it afterwards and you go, wait a second, no, I died because I ran my first 4 Hellions into 12 Zerglings in a surround, and they died, and that was terrible. And because of that, this big gamble of building 30 other Zerglings did heaps of damage, and from there I was just way too far behind. So it's very easy if you're already behind or dead to not die for another 10 minutes, and then to kind of like lose track of what went wrong in the game. So that's something which sometimes happens, but generally it's like how to macro while being pressured. It's like, well, you don't really need to. We're Terran, we have a wall off. We sit behind the wall off. What pressure can our opponent really do to us? Not that much if we're well set up. So the idea should be have the correct units up, the correct wall up at the right time, you know, set things up nicely, and our opponent shouldn't be able to fuck with us too much. Not only that, obviously, you know, there are habits like macroing off hotkeys and that sort of stuff, but otherwise I think I'm going to need to leave that question for now and kind of come back to it later if I can, because that part of the question is just, it's too loaded with way too many different things we could talk about, right? Like it's fascinating because it's like, how do we macro while being pressured? And it's like, well, you don't. You just shut down the pressure quickly and then you go back to doing what your normal build is. And that's a lot of StarCraft. It's not about how do you do 5 things at once. It's like, well, why are we in a situation where we need to do 5 things at once? That's fucked.
The point I liked in this question was I keep letting my opponent do what they want and while I macro. that was the main thing that I was expecting to be apparent in this replay. But yeah, it did seem like he just got more behind early, like losing that Reaper. The opponent went for a greedy opening and stuff, so that just contributed a lot.
It's this build as well, though, so I think, you know, you're spot on. We definitely do get to see that, because look at this. It's like third base on location, multiple tanks leapfrogged out, wall off, but we're not going to be able to do any pressure anytime soon, and we know how that goes against a Zerg player. Even if the Zerg decides to waste some Banelings like that and headbutt, a single Liberator is nice. It's not enough. Not against Zerg. This is the equivalent of Oracle harassing against Protoss, something I encourage Protoss, against Zerg, something I encourage Protoss players not to do, because most players aren't good enough to pull it off. They don't get enough value out of it. So I'm like, you guys either need to get better at your Oracle harass or start doing something that has more of a punch behind it. And the thing is, if you are going to do Oracle harass or Liberator harass, you've got to follow it up with something. So against Zerg especially, you've got to have some tighter pressures. You can choose to play purely defensively against Terran or Protoss, but I think it's very boring. Do I accept crypto donations?
Definitely.
Yes, you guys can click on my PayPal button below my stream. Yes, click the donation button below my stream. It gives options. Thanks. Guys, exclamation mark tip or exclamation mark donation in chat if you're on mobile. If you feel like sending me some money, go for it. I wholeheartedly encourage you giving me money. Thank you, guys. I definitely didn't ask Starlight to send me that message beforehand. So yeah, so basically against Zerg, we need to do more pressure. But I think it's also good against Terran and Protoss to be very focused around some preset pressures. Like this drop here it's like, it's not bad as like a small piece of random pressure, but it's never really going to pack a big punch. And like many players against Zerg, we're not really doing anything to like push the front or slow down the creep or clear up the map control at all. We're letting the Zerg control the entire map. And I'll tell you, the Zerg feels a lot more comfortable when they've got all these overlords, Zerglings on all the watchtowers. Whereas sending drops through the middle or some sort of scary looking push through the middle to clear all that up, that's what really throws the Zerg out of their comfort zone and really gets you in a very nice position. So the thing is, so number one, even against non-Zerg opponents, I think it's always good to have some sort of push timing. Even if it's a 3-base push timing, we should always have a real clear game plan of when we're attacking. The question was, you know, how do I sit back too much? I let them get ahead. Well, let's make sure we're more focused on hitting a sharp timing, and then we can benchmark that timing, right? Once again, we see everything's in dropships here. It's this tendency to not just move out across the map in the middle. It's actually kind of a bad habit. I think it's usually a lot better to just be pushing through the middle as much as possible against Zerg, because as I said before, otherwise they just get to see what's going on and they get comfortable. And you don't need to commit with these pushes. Just clearing up the watchtowers, kill a few creep tumors, pick up a new medevacs and run away is fine. But it just gives you a lot more comfort and a lot more preparation for what's going on. It's not just that. StarCraft's a game where it's very easy to make a ton of mistakes and lose track of where you are in the game, especially if you're not sure of what's happening, and to constantly feel like you're blindsided by your opponent's maneuvers because you're not attacking. You're just sitting at home for 90% of the game. So having really clear pre-planned attack timings that you can kind of consistently do and work on, it allows you to get way more consistent on how you execute. And like I said, we want to benchmark those timings. So what we see here is Fading Light is very macro focused. Building up, third base. Let's get this going. Planetary on the third. That should always be an orbital. Yes, of course, Bitcoin. God damn it. Do I need to block communication? Of course. Go click the button. Stop messaging me. Read. Jesus. Do people not know how to use Twitch chat? I'm assuming you're watching the stream, Starlight. I appreciate if you feel like donating money, but the Twitch chat is right there and I read it. And I just don't understand why people don't know how to read the Twitch, ask questions in the Twitch chat. I answer almost everything that gets asked there. It's crazy. Anyways, we don't want a planetary on the third. What's happening with Fading Light here is it's like very focused on the macro. And the moment we move out with the units, it's very tentative. It's like a single lib or a single dropship, or it's 3 dropships. And we're mismacroing really badly every time we're pushing out. So what we're not having a good sense of juggling when to focus on spending our money, when to focus on our macro. Our upgrades are not consistently being upgraded, so we're not making 2-2. You know, we're kind of adding a little bit more production, but our production is also a little bit dicily placed. I mean, there's a good avenue on the left, so it'll be okay. The tanks can pop out the left-hand side. Just the right-hand side is too small for Thors and tanks to fit through. But yeah, essentially what's going to happen here is we see lots of money floating at lots of points. And we're building up an army, which is mostly Marine Marauder, but now we're building kind of a couple of Liberators and Thors in the mix. So I'm not 100% sure what the army focus here is as well. I feel like it's one of these mixed compositions a lot of Terrans find themselves in, where it's like, well, we've got a random Liberator, we've got one random siege tank from earlier in the game, we're leaving all our other tanks at home. This is essentially just a Marine Marauder ball, and we have zero map vision or presence all game, and then when we do move out on the map, we get kind of ambushed and just lose all our stuff in a big ball, despite having macroed far better than our opponent all game long. So this is one of these games where we need just a clearer game plan of when we're pressuring. So I would say, I mean, 2-1-1's a really nice game plan just because it's so mapped out. I don't think it's the right build for everyone. It's a very personal choice, what builds you like, which ones you don't like. But 2-1-1's great because it's like 5 minutes 20, really sharp, 16 Marines with stim, and sometimes it just fucking kills them. You know, it's like a real, like, it's a check. It's like, did I do my build properly and hit my timing properly? Yeah, I got in there at 5 minutes 30 with my stim Marines. That's not far behind pros. Fuck yeah. Did they have enough units to defend? They did. That's fine. I'll pull back and come with another attack later. And that could be a 2-base Marine tank push, could be a 3-base bio tank push, whatever the hell you want. But it is important to have a focus in that regard as well. So what I see here is, you know, we got up a third, but we didn't consistently continue upgrades. We didn't consistently head in a certain tech direction. We're kind of building a lot of Thors now, which is not what you want against Hydras. You actually want siege tanks against that. And this is going to hurt us a lot just because, you know, we're not consistently building out of our barracks either. So we've actually got 3 reactors, but multiple times we've only seen like 0 or 2 Marines building at a time. We see it once again. We're not building Marines constantly. So if we're going to play a big macro style where it's all about overwhelming our opponent, well, we need to make sure those upgrades get on time. We need to make sure we build the correct composition, something that's good. Biotank is the most generally good composition, pretty much always in every matchup, but especially against Zerg. It's really good against Hydras, works okay against Mutas as well. And that would be great. And we would want to keep taking a 4th and a 5th base and continuing like that and all that sort of stuff. But I think that it's very personal. Like, do you want to play that style? Do you want to play a super macro style? I think somewhere in between is always good. And as a general marker, you want to have some sort of push which you focus around and you benchmark and you say, cool, I hit at 180 supply, 2-2 upgrades were finished, I had 7 siege tanks, 6 medevacs, and a ton of bio. Hit that at 9 minutes. And then you look at it the next game and you're like, oh, I hit it at 9 minutes 30, what did I fuck up? And then you can kind of use that to just see how well you're doing and focus on the deets.
That's what I was hoping to do with this replay. There's a lot of submissions here that are like, how could I have like macroed and scaled better than this person? I was hoping this one to get the concept out that like if you're trying to macro, you're trying to macro towards like a push or a timing or something, like even if that's later in the game, because if you just like sit back and wait till you get to 200 supply and just keep macroing after that, like you're not going to get as much done.
The lead will evaporate over time, won't it, right? Yeah, it's like,
yeah,
it's like we want to build towards a certain advantage. Like even when we're playing a big reactive macro style, we want to be pointed with it. So there's 2 things that we need to learn, not as beginner StarCraft players, but as intermediate StarCraft players, where we're starting to understand all of our hotkeys and control groups and cool things. But what we don't usually, we usually end up tilted as a player. We're either way too focused on just building a big army and we've got no fucking idea what we're doing. We're just building lots of stuff and trying to spend, and we're trying to spend our money. Or we're very, very focused on the opposite, where we've got like some sort of aggressive attacks we do and our macro is just appallingly bad behind it. And straddling the middle ground is hard. It's not easy, but it's something where if you're doing macro, you make sure you're building up to that big 3-base push. You have a very set, you have a whole list written down. Got to have 2-2, got to have this, got to have this. And when you watch your replays, if you're missing some of those things, you got to analyze it and say, well, why did I forget those things in this game? What went wrong? How can I do better? And it just gives you this great direction for improvement. It's why a lot of the best players, pro players included, I guarantee you Serral was probably like this as well, though I don't know because I just didn't pay attention to Serral much when he was a younger player. They're cheesy as Tuck. They are so goddamn cheesy. They're just very aggressive, very all in. I was as well when I was developing, because it was like you had these very tight strategic ideas or tactical ideas of like, I'm going to finish with this like Ling run by. I'm going to do this. Like I did a lot of like strats where I would literally float an Overlord in to pull their sentry away from the ramp, and then I would drone drill through and flood speedlings at the same time, and they wouldn't be able to get their force field up before I kill the Zealot in the wall. Like, just like these crazy cheeses like that. I would do ones where I would feint at the front, and then I would unload a ton of Hydras in their main base. So they would have to come up their main base narrow ramp into an arc of Hydras, and that's how I would win. And my macro was appalling, and I was floating money, but I was really like clear on like, okay, I've got the army for this. Just focus on setting it up. And I would put all my focus on that, and I wouldn't macro at all while I'm doing it. It's technically, looking at it now, it's not great play, but it was good enough for the time to beat very high level players because we were all newer to the game, and I was very focused on what my win condition was and how I could win the game. So the moment you give yourself that direction, it's really good. And it's why I encourage people to play quite aggressive or even sometimes cheesy. Something why, especially in my Terran coaching, more than my other races, I'm constantly saying, let's do a 2-base tank push. People are like, why do you always coach Terrans to cheese? Why don't you teach them to get good at the game? And I'm like, there's a few reasons. The first is their macro is not that good, but they get lost. They don't realize their macro is not that good, and they're not realizing the mistakes they're making because they're not building up to a clear goal. So players aren't going into their replays and realizing what's going wrong because it's like this half-hour fucking long blob of a game. What are you looking at? What are you looking at? It's too hard for someone who's not super experienced to figure out the mistakes they're making, right? But if I can give them a 2-base tank push and get them to benchmark that every game, or even a 3-base 2-2 push, so that's a bit more advanced, they can suddenly start seeing, oh, I'm late this game, I fucked it up. Oh, and so they can actually refine their early game macro to a higher level. A lot of players who think, oh, no, I'm a macro player, they don't actually have that good macro in the first few minutes of the game because their games drag on and they don't focus enough on the real high-level refinement of those early points. So if you guys can do that, it's going to be absolutely game-changing to your play. It's going to be absolutely game-changing. And it's why I don't mind people being a bit cheesy as well. If you have a cheesy strat that excites you and is very focused around something, and I always say, you know, it's just about having a game plan. Like an example, we've been talking about Terran, obviously, because of Fading Light's perspective. What about if you're Zerg and you just love Mutalisks? And you're just like, well, the whole thing is I just want to mass Mutalisks, and that's it. And all you do is like, you build spine crawlers and mutalisks. So you're basically trying to learn how to expand really fast while massing mutas and constantly doing run bys with them. And you're just getting really good at mutas. And there's going to be gaps in your play. You're going to suck at certain things. But if you get really good at those mutas and finding the holes and figuring out like, okay, well, when I've gone into the Terran's base from here, but he has units there now, and I need to go macro, but I got to get damage with the mutas as well. How do I handle that? And you'll be like, oh, I can queue my mutas to go here and then down here. And in that 20 seconds while they're rotating, I can inject, spend my money, build some Zerglings, get another base, and then the mutas are there and I can send them back in and do harassment without losing any harassment time. And I found the weak spot in their armor, and you're like, oh, cool. And you've just found this extremely advanced detail of how to split your actions and your attention up because you're so motivated to make massive mutalisks work. So definitely get out there, try and be as focused as possible on a certain composition. Once Vipers come out, once Ultras come out, once the game gets to this point, it gets harder, it gets more advanced. This is why I'm a big fan of finish the game at a clear point. It's why I often tell Terrans in TVP, bio-lib or die trying, don't fucking make ghosts. Don't do that. They're too complicated. It's the same reason I'm telling Zerg players, you know, oh, you want to get good against mech? Play Roach, Hydra, Viper. Not allowed to make any other units. Only Roaches, Hydras, and Vipers. And they're like, fuck, but if I made Broodlords, I would have won this game. And I'm like, probably, but I know you at your level as a player, and you probably would have fucked up making the Broodlords anyway, number one. Well, that's number two, really. Number one is you suck at microing Vipers. Let's motivate you to get good with the Vipers first. Once we get good at that stage, then we can learn the next step. Too many people try to go to the next step without learning the first step first. So a lot of StarCraft is taking this incredibly complex, overwhelming, insanely hard game and trying to accept the fact that we're all dumbasses. We're all a little bit stupid. We're not fucking Maru. We're not Serral. We're a little bit slow. Some of us have old hands or slow reactions. And trying to dumb the game down just a little bit. Ooh, Diamond Tournament Grand Finals. I didn't realize it says that in the replay. That's cool. This is a Diamond Tournament. Yeah, it said on the loading screen. That's cool. But yeah, guys, so I think just to sum up that last one, it's just that idea of, you know, if you're falling behind, if you're letting your opponents get ahead of you, you're having trouble closing out games, it all comes back to let's make sure we're building towards a really tight timing and we get better at that. You know, I pointed out many small mistakes that game. We'll come back and probably later on talk a little bit more about that idea of juggling actions. but I did touch on it there. Whenever micro was happening, there was no macro happening for the first 10 minutes of that game. So whenever you're going to enter a micro situation, queue up extra macro, queue up extra units, know you're going to be focused on that. So